The classroom hung in silence as the alien instructor's voice carried across the vaulted chamber, each syllable sharp and deliberate. The walls were transparent alloy, framing the blue-white arc of a gas giant below, but none of the cadets' eyes strayed from the lectern. Every seat was filled, rows upon rows of young recruits drawn from a dozen worlds, their gazes fixed on the thin, pale figure at the front. The Terran species, the instructor said, stood against inevitability with all the ferocity one could expect from a short-lived people. They fought bravely, yes, but bravado cannot defy mathematics. Their fleets were shattered, their colonies reduced to rubble, their very homeworld burned until oceans boiled. The Dominion's victory was total. Earth lost that war. That is history. A ripple of soft clicks and hums moved through the audience as alien cadets signaled agreement in their native tongues. Marcus Hale sat rigid, hands locked against his knees beneath the desk, refusing to join the chorus. He had heard this lesson before, from other mouths, in other classrooms, and the taste of it never grew easier. His hair was dark, trimmed to regulation length, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. He had come to the Interstellar Academy of History as one of the few human cadets admitted in recent years, a concession made to diplomacy rather than any genuine belief in his people's worth. To most here, he was an oddity, a relic kept alive to honor treaties written long after the war. The instructor's hands spread wide, long fingers stretching like skeletal branches. What lesson do we draw from the fall of Earth? That courage is not enough. That defiance without calculation is suicide. The Dominion crushed them as surely as gravity pulls a body down. It could not have ended otherwise. Marcus clenched his jaw, but he stayed silent. He had been warned often enough by advisors to temper his reactions, to let history pass across him like wind over stone. Yet every word landed like a strike against his ribs. He could hear his father's voice, not as memory but as presence, deep and steady. Never let them write the last page for us. The cadet to Marcus's left, a scaled creature with 4 yellow eyes, leaned in and whispered in amusement. Your kind had spirit, Hale, but it burned out quickly. At least the records honor you for trying. Marcus did not answer. He fixed his gaze on the instructor, refusing to let the sneer of a peer push him into rashness. His silence was its own resistance, though it burned inside him like acid. Then, from the far side of the room, a quiet voice rose. It belonged to a cadet Marcus had scarcely noticed before, a small figure with pale blue skin and silver eyes that reflected light like water. Her tone was soft, almost hesitant, but her words struck the air with more weight than volume. Sir, she asked, have you ever read the last page? The instructor stilled, the long frills along his neck twitching. The last page. Yes, she said, voice gaining firmness. The Terran Chronicles. The full record, not the abridged texts distributed by the Dominion Council. Have you ever read the end? Murmurs ran through the chamber. Cadets turned in their seats, eyes flicking between her and the instructor. The alien historian gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. The Chronicles are a myth, child. Human writings, filled with melodrama and exaggeration. They cannot be trusted as objective record. What matters is the outcome, and the outcome is clear: Earth was defeated. Their kind is no longer a force in this galaxy. The girl's mouth pressed shut, but she did not lower her gaze. The tension in the room grew thick, pressing down like weight. Marcus felt the atmosphere shift, felt something awaken within him that he had kept buried through years of quiet endurance. No one else seemed to understand the gravity of what she had asked. But Marcus did. The words rang in his chest, stirring memories he had carried since boyhood. Nights spent at his father's side, listening to stories whispered in low tones, stories that never ended in surrender. Words written in a journal that smelled of smoke and oil. Phrases marked not with despair but with promise. He exhaled slowly, his hands finally unclenching beneath the desk. The instructor moved on, his lecture resuming as if the interruption had been nothing but dust brushed aside. Yet Marcus no longer heard the words. His focus lingered on that single question, and on the way the girl's silver eyes had burned with quiet certainty. The class eventually dissolved, cadets spilling from their seats in streams of colored uniforms. Marcus remained seated until the room thinned, until the echoes of alien chatter had faded into the corridors beyond. His heart beat heavy, not with anger but with something harder to name. Resolve, perhaps, or the first stirrings of defiance. As he rose at last, he glanced once more at the instructor, still gathering his notes at the front. Then his gaze drifted to the stars framed beyond the transparent wall. The gas giant's pale light washed the chamber in ghostly hues, and Marcus thought of Earth's own skies, long unseen by any living human in this part of space. History had declared his people defeated. The Dominion had written the narrative, bound it in text, taught it in classrooms across 100 systems. But tonight, for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to wonder if history's final word was nothing but a lie waiting to be unmasked. The instructor believed Earth had lost. The cadets believed it. Even many humans had come to accept it as fact. But Marcus felt the echo of that quiet question burn like fire in his chest. Had anyone ever read the last page? He walked from the chamber with the words repeating in his mind, each step carrying him deeper into the shadows of a truth he was no longer willing to ignore. Marcus sat in his quarters long after the academy's corridors had gone quiet, the sterile hum of recycled air the only sound around him. His room was small, little more than a box of steel and light, but in the drawer beneath his bunk lay the one object that truly belonged to him. He pulled it free with careful hands, brushing his fingers over the worn surface of the old journal. Its leather cover was cracked, the edges frayed from decades of handling, and the faint scent of oil and smoke still clung to it despite the years. The pages had yellowed, but his father's handwriting remained firm, etched in bold strokes that seemed to carry weight even across time. Marcus opened to the first entries he had ever read as a boy, back when Elias Hale's voice had guided him line by line, teaching him to sound out the words while weaving tales of battles fought in orbit and on ruined ground. The ink did not speak of defeat. His father's accounts were filled with hardship and blood, yes, but they pulsed with determination, with a certainty that surrender was never written into their nature. The Dominion had called it inevitable. The galaxy believed it absolute. But the journal carried another truth, one that had burned into Marcus's memory like scripture. He remembered a night from his childhood, the last before his father had left Earth's surface for the final campaign. The air had smelled of ash, drifting from fires burning beyond the city walls. Marcus had been no more than 7, huddled in a shelter with Elias seated beside him, the man's broad shoulders stooped with weariness yet unbroken in spirit. "Never let them write the last page for us," Elias had whispered, placing the journal in his son's hands. "History belongs to those who endure, not those who claim victory too soon." That sentence had clung to Marcus ever since. He could still see the lines of exhaustion in his father's face, the faint tremor in his hands, and yet the fire in his eyes had burned brighter than the flames consuming the horizon outside. He had marched away the next morning with the Terran Defense Forces, leaving Marcus with only his words and the journal that contained them. Marcus closed his eyes in the present, the memory settling like a weight on his chest. He had believed, as a child, that his father would return. But the war had swallowed him as it swallowed millions, and no message had ever come back. Official records listed General Elias Hale as one of countless casualties in the Dominion's final assault. Yet the last entries in the journal, the ones Marcus had only decoded years later with the help of old encryption keys, told a different story. They spoke of a plan. Marcus turned the pages now, reading once more the fragments his father had left behind. Notes of fleets massing in secret, coordinates hidden within riddles, references to movements not recorded in Dominion accounts. Words like departure and beyond the rim repeated in careful strokes. The meaning was not yet clear, but the implication was undeniable. He closed the book with a sharp breath, the echoes of his father's voice merging with the memory of that silver-eyed cadet's question. Had anyone ever read the last page? The following day in class, the instructor resumed his lectures, tracing Dominion conquests with cold precision. When he reached the section describing humanity's final collapse, Marcus felt his patience thin to breaking. "You omit too much," he said suddenly, his voice sharper than intended. The words cut across the room, drawing dozens of alien gazes in his direction. The instructor tilted his head, frills along his neck flaring slightly. "Explain, cadet." Marcus stood slowly, his palms pressed against the desk. "You recite battles and losses, but you never speak of what came after the siege of Earth. There are gaps in your record. Campaigns you gloss over, fleets you say were destroyed without proof. What of the missing Dominion carriers reported in the outer sectors? What of the uncharted Exodus ships sighted beyond the rim? Whispers broke out among the cadets. Some hissed with amusement, others laughed outright. One tall reptilian student barked, "Humans romanticize their failures. Even in death, they dream of glory." Marcus ignored them. His eyes locked with the instructor's, refusing to yield. "You call it history, but it's a story trimmed to fit the Dominion's pride. My people fought to the last, and you have no proof we ever surrendered." The instructor's expression chilled. "Cadet Hale, control your tone. The records are complete. Your species' fate is sealed in them. Do not confuse your sentiment with scholarship." The class dissolved into laughter and clicks, but Marcus stood unmoved. For the first time, he did not feel like a relic tolerated in a hall of victors. He felt like a spark threatening to ignite. When the session ended, he returned to his quarters with his pulse still racing. He pulled the journal free again, fingers trembling as he opened to the encrypted passages. He had read them before, puzzled over them in frustration, but tonight the words seemed sharper. "They can erase records," Elias had written, "but not every witness. Not every page. When the council believes us gone, we will be elsewhere. Endure." Marcus traced the word "elsewhere" with his thumb. His father's pen had dug hard into the paper, carving the letters deep. He understood then that his father had never intended to leave a record of surrender. He had left a clue, one that Marcus was only beginning to piece together. The truth had been hidden, buried beneath the Dominion's carefully curated history. Perhaps others had tried to uncover it and been silenced. Perhaps none had looked closely enough. But Marcus could no longer ignore the trail before him. He placed the journal back in its drawer and shut it carefully, though the decision had already taken root in his mind. If the Academy taught only one version of history, he would seek the rest elsewhere. His father had given him the first map. That silver-eyed cadet had given him the spark. Together they had reignited something he thought had long since gone cold. The corridors outside his room thrummed with the footsteps of cadets returning from drills. Marcus sat in the dim light, staring at the closed drawer as if it held a universe waiting to be unlocked. For the first time since setting foot in the Academy, he did not feel like a survivor of a defeated people. He felt like the inheritor of a story not yet finished. The Dominion's truth was not the final word. And Marcus knew, with a certainty that left his hands trembling, that the last page was waiting for him to turn it. The Academy's archives stretched beneath the main towers like the veins of some ancient beast, corridors lined with cold metal and endless stacks of data crystals humming softly in their shelves. Few cadets ever ventured there without permission, for the walls were patrolled by silent drones and monitored by eyes hidden in every corner. Yet Marcus moved through the gloom with measured steps, the override code from his father's journal glowing faintly on the handheld slate in his palm. He had spent weeks unraveling the encryption, cross-referencing with fragments of forgotten Terran scripts until the sequence finally resolved. It had opened doors in the system's security that should have remained sealed. Now, deep below the classrooms and parade grounds, Marcus sought what no lecture would ever reveal. His breath echoed faintly in the cavernous halls as he moved between aisles. Records of thousands of wars gleamed around him, neatly catalogued, histories polished to perfection. Yet when he reached the section devoted to Earth, he saw the shelves grow thin, entire gaps where data should have been. The Dominion had not merely defeated humanity, they had excised them from memory. He drew closer, pulling a crystal from its slot. Its surface flickered, showing summaries of battles already etched into his mind by years of propaganda: the fall of Luna, the bombardment of Mars, the boiling of Earth's seas. Yet when the crystal scrolled to the so-called final victory, the display glitched. The record ended abruptly, as though someone had cut the file mid-sentence. Marcus frowned, inserting another. Again, the same, a clean narration of loss, followed by silence where the conclusion should have been. He inserted crystal after crystal, his pulse quickening with each fractured ending. History had not been recorded, it had been smothered. "You'll find nothing here," a voice rasped behind him. Marcus spun, the slate nearly tumbling from his grip. From the shadows at the edge of the aisle stepped an old man, his hair thin and silver, his posture bent as though the weight of years had pressed him down. His uniform bore no insignia, its fabric faded and patched, but his eyes burned with the sharpness of one who had seen too much to forget. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, lowering his voice when the sound echoed off the steel. "Someone who once believed in the sanctity of archives," the man said. He stepped into the dim light, revealing a lined face marked by scars across his jaw. "But these halls are mausoleums, boy. They don't preserve truth. They preserve power." Marcus's heart beat harder. He had heard whispers of humans who worked in the academy's depths, tolerated as record keepers or translators. Most were silent, broken figures. This one seemed anything but. "My name is Darius Venn," the old man said, his gaze never leaving Marcus's. "Once, long ago, I served under your father." The words struck with the force of a blow. Marcus stepped closer before he could stop himself. "You knew Elias Hale?" "I fought beside him," Venn replied. His voice softened for the first time, though sorrow laced the edges. "I watched him carry men from burning trenches. I watched him hold the line when all logic said it would crumble. And I watched him refuse to kneel, even when the Dominion brought worlds to their knees around him." Marcus swallowed hard, gripping the slate tighter. "The records say he died during the final siege." Venn's smile was bitter. "Records say many things. But I tell you this, Elias Hale did not die begging for mercy. He did not die at all, not in the way they teach." The old man moved past Marcus, sliding a crystal from a shelf and holding it to the light. "The Dominion purged the archives. They cut away every hint of what came after their supposed victory. But I remember. And I have kept fragments, scraps they failed to erase." Marcus followed him deeper into the aisle, where Venn reached beneath a panel and drew out a container hidden in the wall. Inside lay a cluster of crystals unlike the rest, their surfaces etched with markings that glowed faintly red. "These," Venn said, "are the shadows of truth. Unstable files, corrupted, but not destroyed. They tell of fleets vanishing into dark space. Of Dominion armadas lost without trace. Of humans who refused to die when the galaxy demanded it." Marcus reached out, his hand trembling as he took one of the crystals. He slid it into his slate, and the screen flared alive with distorted images. Battles in unknown regions. Starfields beyond familiar charts. Transmissions broken by static, but voices cutting through with unmistakable resolve. "We are not defeated," one crackling voice declared. "We take the war where they cannot follow. Remember us." Marcus felt his throat tighten. His father's handwriting in the journal, the words of endurance, now aligned with voices that refused extinction. The last page was real. It had not been read because it had been hidden. Venn watched him with narrowed eyes. "Do you understand now why they mock your kind in classrooms? Why they strip your history to fragments? They fear what truth can inspire. If they admitted that humanity fought beyond the rim, that colonies and fleets slipped free, the Dominion's myth of inevitability would crumble." Marcus closed the slate, his pulse unsteady. "Then the war isn't over." Venn's expression darkened. "No. It never ended. It simply moved beyond sight. And if you seek to follow it, you'll mark yourself as a threat. The Dominion crushes threats before they bloom." The warning carried weight, but Marcus could not turn back. Every instinct told him that his father's legacy waited beyond these walls, beyond the falsified records. He had been raised on silence and propaganda, but the fragments now stitched together into something undeniable. Humanity had endured. "Why tell me this?" Marcus asked, studying the old man's lined face. "Because," Venn said, his gaze hard, "I am too old to carry the burden any longer. And because when I saw you in that lecture hall, defying them with nothing but your voice, I remembered what it felt like to believe." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the archive's machinery. Marcus slipped the crystal into his pocket, the weight of it pressing against him like a promise. Venn turned back toward the shadows. "Be careful, Hale. The truth is heavier than lies, and it will break you if you carry it carelessly." Marcus watched him disappear into the dark, his steps slow but steady, as though he belonged more to the ghosts of memory than the living. Left alone, Marcus stood among the shelves of fractured history. The academy above taught that Earth had lost, that humanity's flame had burned out against the cold certainty of Dominion might. But in his hand he carried proof of another ending, one still unfolding. He looked up toward the ceiling, toward the stars beyond the stone and steel, and he felt the echo of his father's words rise within him once more. Never let them write the last page. And for the first time, he believed with unshakable certainty that the last page had not been written at all. The lecture hall was full, every seat occupied, the hum of voices echoing off the high walls before quieting as the instructor stepped to the front. His long robes shimmered faintly under the artificial lights, his pale eyes scanning the rows of cadets with the same detached authority that had silenced them 100 times before. Marcus sat in the second row, his posture rigid, his jaw locked. The crystal from the archives weighed heavily in his pocket, its presence both anchor and burden. Today's lecture was the culmination of the course, the final analysis of the Terran War. The instructor spread his hands as he spoke, his voice carrying with rehearsed gravity. Let this be remembered as the ultimate example of futility. A primitive species, burning bright for a brief moment, extinguished by the inevitability of empire. Earth lost that war, cadets. Their sacrifice is acknowledged, their courage admired, but their defeat remains absolute. That is the lesson of history. The hall murmured with agreement, cadets nodding in solemnity. But Marcus felt the blood surge in his veins, a fire that had been building for weeks. He rose to his feet before his thoughts could caution him, his voice breaking the silence. No, he said, firm and clear. Every eye turned toward him. The instructor stilled, his frills tightening. Cadet Hale, he said coldly, you will sit down. You mistake passion for scholarship again. Marcus remained standing. His hand moved to the slate on his desk, sliding the crystal into its port. The screen flickered alive, projecting a hazy image into the air above. For a moment static filled the space, then a voice crackled through, distorted but strong. We are not defeated, the transmission declared. We take the war where they cannot follow. Remember us. Gasps rippled through the hall. The projection shifted, showing fragments of battles in unknown starfields, human ships darting through black space as Dominion carriers burned in silence. The images were fractured, incomplete, but unmistakable. The instructor's composure fractured for the first time. This is falsified, he snapped. Human propaganda, nothing more. Shut it down. But Marcus's voice cut across him. These are Dominion records. Buried in your own archives, hidden because they contradict your truth. My father wrote of it in his journals. He and others led fleets beyond the rim, into places the Dominion could not reach. They did not surrender. They endured. The hall erupted in noise, cadets shouting over one another, some in disbelief, others in awe. The silver-eyed cadet from before sat forward, her expression lit with quiet triumph. For the first time, Marcus saw doubt flicker in the faces of his peers, a crack in the certainty that had been drilled into them. The instructor's voice rose, sharp as a blade. Silence. These are lies designed to poison young minds. Humanity was broken. Earth is ash. Nothing remains. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady now, strengthened by the weight of truth. Something remains. If humanity had truly fallen, you would not need to erase us. You would not need to cut pages from history or bury records in shadow. You fear what the truth can inspire, because a defeated people cannot return, but a people who endured can rise again. The room quieted, his words hanging heavy in the air. Even those who wished to laugh found their voices gone. The projection still shimmered above them, voices of long-lost soldiers repeating their vow to fight beyond reach. The instructor's eyes burned with fury, but beneath it Marcus glimpsed something else, fear. The man knew, or at least suspected, that the narrative he preached was not complete. The Dominion had crafted a myth, and Marcus had torn a hole through its fabric. Enough, the instructor hissed. He stepped forward, robes whispering across the floor. You will be expelled for this insolence. You will be silenced before your delusions spread. Marcus held his ground. Silence me if you must, but the words are already spoken. Others have heard them. The last page cannot be buried forever. For a long moment, the hall trembled with the weight of choice. Cadets shifted in their seats, some casting uncertain glances at one another, others staring at Marcus with newfound respect. The silver-eyed cadet rose quietly to her feet, her gaze fixed on him, as if acknowledging that his defiance had given voice to what she had only hinted at. The instructor raised a hand to cut the projection, but it flickered once more, as if defying him. The final image froze in the air, a human fleet stretching into the void, ships vanishing into darkness with the message echoing one last time. Remember us. The hall fell into silence. The projection dissolved, leaving only the lingering memory of what had been seen. The instructor's hand trembled as he lowered it, his authority unsettled in front of those who had once accepted his every word. Marcus felt the tension ease in his chest, though he knew the cost of his defiance would be severe. Yet in that silence, he also knew he had planted something far greater than fear. He had given them doubt. He had given them possibility. He turned his gaze toward the stars framed beyond the transparent wall, their light sharp and cold, and he felt his father's presence as if Elias Hale stood beside him. Never let them write the last page. The instructor's voice finally broke the silence, quiet but venomous. You have no idea what storm you've unleashed, Hale. The Dominion does not forgive. Marcus met his gaze with steady eyes. Then let them come. Humanity has not forgiven either. The hall erupted again, not with laughter or scorn this time, but with murmurs charged with electricity. The idea had taken root, and nothing could uproot it now. Marcus walked from his seat with his head high, the crystal still burning against his palm, the echo of human voices following him like a heartbeat. The last page had not been written, and he would make certain it never would be.